Part 2. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weining. Chapter 11. Chapter 11. The Emperor's Big Boss Pei Xian. Xia Yu stepped out of the camera, wearing a well-tailored black dress. The simple lines outlined her beautiful waist. Her face was pale and her shoulders were thin, which made her look rather pitiful. She walked to stand next to Chu Chen and continued what Chu Chen said. Sister is a very good person. She strives for perfection in everything she does and puts a lot of pressure on herself. She raised a pair of misty. There was overflowing sadness in her eyes. My sister once said that she loved the emperor and her fans very much, and she must present the best side to everyone. Therefore, she has been working hard, even if she is accepting during the more than a year of treatment for depression. I have been secretly practicing and creating. There were sobs coming from all around the square. If Xiaoling hadn't seen Xia Yu's true face before and was humiliated to pieces by Xia Yu using the most vicious words in the world, then today, after seeing this performance, even Xiaoling would believe what a good sister this good sister is. Love her. She should have known a long time ago that Xia Yu is simply a perfect actress. Xia Yu's emotional performance moved everyone. Countless people cried with her both inside and outside the camera. And her identity strengthened her persuasion. Some people were crying and talking in low voices. She is Xiaoling's biological sister. What she said must be true. It seems that Xiaoling is really suffering from depression. Yes, Xiaoling often mentions Xia Yu during interviews, saying that the relationship between the two sisters is very good. What Xia Yu said must be true. It turns out we were all wrong. There was no murder at all. Xiaoling committed suicide because she was ill and couldn't think about it. Xiaoling listened to these discussions and smiled bitterly. Is this called digging one's own grave? She used to trust Xia Yu so much, and how much she loved and cared for this frail sister. Whether it was an interview or a fan meeting, she could not do without this sister, in a tone full of intimacy and pride. All Xiaoling's fans know that Xia Yu is the treasure she holds in the palm of her hand. So much so that they all thought that Xia Yu was equally kind to her sister. Xia Yu in the camera is crying so hard. Staff helped her down. The screen switched away and slowly played the entire chronology of Xiaoling from her debut to the present. Many classic melodies accompanied by classic footage were presented in front of everyone, grand and prosperous, telling a splendid era belonging to Xiaoling. Xiaoling has never calmed down to take a good look at the things she took. In her previous life, she seemed to have always been busy, singing new songs, filming new endorsements, receiving different awards, and going to different banquets. She also has to be busy taking care of Xia Yu and the disputes with Pei Xian. Until today, when all the past events have become a thing of the past, she finally stands in the vast sea of people, looking up to the former Xiaoling along with thousands of fans. The person on the big screen has an extremely gorgeous face, beautiful eyes that are shining with hope, and there is a faint charm and arrogance in the movement of the eyes. Every move is full of infinite charm. Someone behind the scenes once said with a smile during an interview that editing Xiaoling's film was both easy and difficult. The simple thing is that any shot can capture the picture. The difficult thing is that there are so many beautiful things that I don't know how to choose. There are many people who hate Xiaoling, and there are also many people who slander her, but no one has ever denied that she has a good skin. There is also that arrogant attitude, as if he has never been hurt at all. I still remember that year, when she was brought home by Pei Xian. He raised her face with his hand. Such a perfect face should not have the slightest haze. Pei Xian gave her the best and fulfilled all her wishes. He paid a lot of money to hire a private tutor for Xiaoling to teach her etiquette, music, performance, and dance. For her, he sent Xia Yu to the world's top hospitals for diagnosis and treatment, and for her, he assigned a dedicated life assistant and nutritionist. No reservations are allowed in his office. No entry is allowed, only she can come and go as she pleases. Pei Xian's love for her was seen by everyone. Many people began to fawn over Xiaoling, fearing that they might not be at all considerate of her. Her eyes became more and more critical, and her temper became more and more indulgent, but Pei Xian still smiled and doted on her to the sky. Later, one day in the summer when she was 17, he called Feng Kun and Chu Chen, "You are the best producers and managers in the industry, and I will leave my baby to you." The following year, when the flowers were in full bloom, Xiaoling made her debut and became a blockbuster. Some media commented that no one has ever been able to so perfectly combine enchantment and sanctity, arrogance and innocence. Pei Xian held her in his arms to watch the news, lowered his head and kissed her softly. "I said I would make you the most popular artist in the world." At that time, Xiaoling was so grateful and admired him. But now that I think about it, maybe it was just a game from the beginning. He spent a lot of effort and money just to raise the Xiaoling he wanted, the ideal artist and lover. So much so that later, when she tried to escape from the trajectory he controlled, he would become so furious. Pei Xian. Has he ever truly loved her? There was high and low music in her ears, and she didn't know which song it was from which year. Xiaoling was in the crowd at a loss, thinking to herself, until, unexpectedly, the camera switched on the big screen, revealing the scene that made her a face that will never be forgotten. Pei Xian. The nose is straight and the lips are thin. The outline is handsome and majestic, like a god. Like attending all important occasions, he was wearing a low-key and grand formal suit at this time, with an iron gray tie that was meticulously tied, and the finely polished buttons and cuff-links were even more perfect. The priceless hand-cut tailoring made his figure even taller and more perfect. Even through the camera, he felt like a mountain of oppression was coming towards his face. Even the air in the square froze for a moment due to his appearance. Xiaoling looked at him blankly. The next moment, the fear that penetrated her bones came over her so overwhelmingly that she could hardly stand. Taking a step back, she didn't know whose foot she stepped on. The other person yelled something, but she had no time to care. Lu Tao supported her. "Yes, Ling, are you okay?" "You." Xiaoling closed her eyes suddenly and tried her best not to think about the face that frightened her. It turns out that even if you have experienced life and death, even if you have changed your body, the damage is still deposited deep in your soul, indelible and irreversible. When she saw him again, she thought she would be in pain and sadness, but instead, she was more frightened and frightened. Lu Tao's hand firmly grasped Xiaoling's arm, and the heat and strength from his palm made her gradually calm down. She told herself repeatedly in her heart, "Xiaoling, you have been reborn. You are now Yexing Ling, and you will never be locked up in the villa at the mercy of that person again. You are now thousands of miles away from him, completely changed beyond recognition. You are safe, safer than ever." The noise around him gradually returned to his ears. Then, came Pei Xian's speech. His voice was a little lower and hoarse than usual, and his words were formal and official, with no trace of fluctuations audible. What the emperor lost was not Xiaoling, but an era. The spotlights flashed continuously, some screamed, some cried uncontrollably, and some even fainted. Because of his short words, the scene instantly went out of control. The camera quickly switched. Live broadcasts from all over the world shook and flashed on the big screen. Every scene was full of chaos. Pei Xian's words directly ignited the emotional peak of everyone present. And he just stood in the center of the storm, silent as a mountain. End of this chapter. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weining. Chapter 12. Chapter 12. Arriving at the location. Segment the lens and advance the zoom. The right amount of light outlines Pei Xian's handsome profile, which is as expressionless as a knife, and his thin lips are pressed into a straight line. Xiaoling is familiar with every detail of his face. Whenever he wants to hide his emotions, he will adopt such a posture. Outside the screen, the commentator was chattering compliments, saying how deep and steady Pei Dong's silence was at this moment, but Xiaoling caught a glimpse of fleeting movement in the corner of the camera. A prompter was desperately gesturing to indicate to Pei Xian to continue. Speak. But he didn't say another word after all. I can't tell who was more disappointed, she or the director. When the scene turned away from Pei Xian, Xiaoling seemed to have been drained of all her strength. This short moment made her understand one thing. Pei Xian came here just to perform his duties as the emperor's big boss. It had nothing to do with memorialization, and it had nothing to do with her, Xiaoling. He has always been a calm and cruel businessman, never doing anything unnecessary. In fact, after being with him for more than 10 years, Xiaoling had heard countless rumors about his ruthlessness, but he had been so indulgent and kind to her that she had always naively thought that she would be the exception. Now, it's time to wake up from the dream. The memorial service was still going on. Xiaoling didn't care about what was broadcast afterwards. She just waited numbly until the show was over and the surging crowd slowly left. Lu Tao ordered his 2 younger brothers to buy CDs while he walked slowly along the street with Xiaoling. He said, "Xingling, don't be too sad. People cannot be resurrected after death. If Xiaoling's spirit in heaven knows that you fans are so sad, it won't be easy." Huh, Xiaoling looked at him blankly. He raised his eyebrows. "Aren't you a fan of Xiaoling?" "I'm not. Don't lie to me. When I watched the memorial service just now, your expression was uglier than crying." "How could it not be the case?" Lu Tao snorted. "Admit it, Xiaoling is a queen, and there is no shame in liking her." "I'm really not." "It's a liar." Lu Tao kept talking along the way, and the stars in the sky gradually lit up, spreading out into a quiet brilliance. At this moment, Xiaoling was glad to have him by her side, driving away the coldness and depression in her heart with his high-pitched voice. Back at the training camp, Lu Tao said good night to her downstairs in the dormitory. "Xingling, there is a word called the dead. Oh, in short," he scratched his hair, "don't be sad for the dead. Go to sleep. We have to get up early tomorrow to shoot the MV." She was stunned for a short moment, and then said softly, "Yes, the deceased has passed away, but life in this world will continue." On this day, the sky was clear and cloudless. A group of trainees, led by Tan Ying, dressed up and headed to the location. It was a mountain forest far away from the city. The team's bus circled along the mountain road. Along the way, the winding paths among the peaks and ridges were half hidden. The water gurgled like broken beads splashing jade. From the mountainside to the top, a group of white buildings could be vaguely seen. The well-proportioned, simple, and beautiful lines are shadowy in the early autumn mist, just like a fairyland. One step at a time, one scene at a time, which looks random and natural, but is actually unique and clearly designed by a master. Someone couldn't help but asked, "Mr. Tan, where is this?" None of the nearby mountains seem to be inhabited. Only this mountain has a large area of houses. Is it a newly developed tourist scenic spot? Tan Ying, who was in the passenger seat, turned around, rolled up the newspaper in his hand and hit the questioner on the head. "Have you ever seen a tourist area with so few people? Let me tell you, this is boss's territory. This mountain," Tan Ying used, he gestured with his hand, "there are a few more around, everywhere you can see them." "Wow," there was a cry of surprise in the car. Xiaoling casually glanced out of the car window and saw mountains surrounding each other, with distant peaks as tall as black daisies. It was indeed big enough. She was not as excited as others. She had seen several properties like this around Pei Xian in her previous life, mostly private villas and gardens. Having experienced it, it didn't feel new to her. Others were aroused and gathered around Tan Ying to ask, "Is it Li boss's industry?" "Nonsense, who else has a boss in Tianyi?" Tan Ying laughed. One sentence made everyone laugh. Tianyi is a very young company, unlike Emperor, which has a rich history. Xiaoling still remembers that when it was first established, she had already become famous, and it only took 6 or 7 years until now. However, in such a short period of time, it has grown from a new star to a large company that has attracted much attention in the industry. Even giants like the emperor are wary of seeing it. All of this is said to be the result of Li Lei, the big boss of Tianyi. Xiaoling has never met this person, and all impressions about him are only rumors. It is said that he is the eldest grandson of the Li family of the underworld, and he founded Tianyi to launder money. It is also said that he is cold-blooded, cruel, and violent and arbitrary. No more. In her last life, she never cared about gossip, and now she can't even recall Li Lei's face. But this is not a big deal. Now she is just a small figure at the bottom of the Tianyi pyramid, and Li Lei is the big boss at the top. No matter how cold, cruel, and capable he has nothing to do with her relationship. With this thought, she leaned her head on the back of the chair and fell asleep amidst the gossip around her. Later, it was Lu Tao who shook her awake. When I opened my eyes, it was already evening and the sky was covered with sunset. The car stopped in the guest room area halfway up the mountain. A group of people filed out carrying large and small bags, and settled down in a room for 4 people. Just after settling in, Lu Tao came to have dinner with her, and then went to the conference hall to gather as if in a hurry. The whole crew was going to hold a meeting. The meeting was hosted by Wei Shaiyin, who is the director and producer of this MV. He arrived a few days before the main force and had already surveyed the scene. At this time, he was assigning tasks like a barrage. The schedule is tight and the workload is huge, but everything is interconnected and orderly, like a machine that runs precisely. Almost all the staff members looked numb and just lowered their heads and quickly wrote down key points in their shorthand notebooks. Only the trainees who came with Xiaoling whispered to each other and looked shocked. No, I have long heard that Wei Shaiyin is a pervert. No, thinking of such a perverted and high-intensity work arrangement, how could it be possible? Lu Tao nudged Xiaoling with his elbow. Hey, yes Xingling, do you think he got the schedule right? The schedule is so tight, it will kill people. Is there any? Xiaoling thought for a while, and it was actually not bad. In her previous life, when her royal producer Feng Kun was recording music for her, although the schedule was not so tight, she occasionally had to rush for time. I also tried this rhythm. No lives were lost. Lu Tao rolled his eyes at the sky. Well, you haven't debuted yet, how can you be like those people? He raised his chin towards the staff in the front row. Those people, at first glance, they have been taken over by Wei Xiao. I am so used to being abused by music that I don't even resist. Xiaoling smiled. Suddenly, she really missed this feeling. The tense and busy location, the serious-looking staff, the photography equipment everywhere, even the air seemed to be lingering with the intoxicating smell of music. At this moment, she finally felt like she was alive. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weiniang. Chapter 13. Chapter 13 Encounter in the Woods. Unfortunately, other trainees obviously don't think so. In the next few days, the recording of the backup dancers was not going smoothly. Wei Shaiyin not only had a tight schedule but also had high requirements. He was either critical of the lack of movement or the lack of vivid expressions. Even a shot of just 3 seconds could be messed up repeatedly by him. Dozens of times. At the end of the day, everyone is as tired as a dog. In the lounge, Lu Tao was paralyzed on the ground half dead, but he was still interested in talking to Xiaoling. Hey, I found that the pervert Wei has called everyone's name these days, and you are the only one who has never eaten ng. Do you have any tips? Tell me quickly, otherwise I will be tortured to death by Wei Wei if this continues. In the past few days, all the trainees have seen Wei Shayan's picky spirit, and Wei Shayan's nickname is well deserved. Xiaoling glanced at the trainees collapsed in the lounge and couldn't help but smile. However, she really doesn't have any knack. The backup dance this time is not too difficult. For her, it is just the same basic skills, and it has even become a soul instinct. Instinct, need any tips? She thought about it and gave him a message, practice well and let it become your instinct. Lu Tao wailed and collapsed on the ground completely motionless. After being tormented by Wei Shayan for more than half a month, the backup dance part finally came to an end. When he announced that all the trainees could take a few days off, everyone cheered. It's a pity that even a young hip-hop dancer like Lu Tao, who has extraordinary physical strength, chose to catch up on sleep in the guest room on the first day of rest. Xiaoling, who had been imprisoned by Pei Ziyan for a year, had an inexplicable shadow on all the bedrooms. Whenever she could not stay in them, she would always go out as much as possible. So, on this sunny autumn day, she picked out an off-white dress and put on a thin coat, and walked alone along the nearby path into the forest. The mountains and forests are quiet and the scenery is rare and beautiful elsewhere. It is no wonder that Wei Shayan chose this place as the location. However, what surprised Xiaoling was that Li Lei, the big boss of Tianyi, would allow him to come here to shoot the scene. In her previous life, she had been with Pei Ziyan for a long time, and she knew a little bit about the nature of big people like them. Private villas like this were mostly used for vacations and entertaining distinguished guests. Not only were they not open to the public, but photography and other matters were also strictly prohibited. Taboo. And now, Wei Shayan actually got the permit. Should it be said that he has the ability, or is Tianyi's powerful boss a maverick? Perhaps, this is the reason why Tianyi can develop and grow rapidly. Is filming the priority? Thinking about it all the way, before you know it, you are going deep into the mountains and forests. The temperature has dropped at some point, and there is a slight hint of coolness. The towering trees block the sun, and the green shades are intertwined. The forest is unusually quiet. Xiaoling's pace slowed down. Looking around, we can no longer see the way and the people. The breeze brought chills to her body, and a faint uneasiness rose from the bottom of her heart. She lingered for a few steps and decided to retreat along the route in her memory. At this moment, some viscous liquid fell on his face. Xiaoling stretched out her hand and touched it. It turned out to be red, with a faint warmth and smell. Her heart was beating wildly uncontrollably. She looked up suddenly and saw half of a corpse hanging upside down among the branches above her head. She didn't know what kind of wild beast had bitten her. One thigh was missing, and there was also a hole in her belly. A huge was torn open, the intestines were pierced, and the internal organs dripped down, covering the broken and deformed face. One eyeball of the corpse was half hanging in the air, and its empty eye socket was facing her. She vaguely heard herself screaming, and her eyes flashed as something flew past the branches and leaves above her. Before she could react, she was hit hard and the world was spinning. The burning pain in her back made her realize that she had been thrown to the ground. Above her head was the beast's heavy breathing. With every breath, the strong smell sprayed on her face. Xiaoling's eyes widened and she was horrified. Staring at that face so close. It is a leopard. A leopard with fierce eyes and blood all over its body. At this time, it was holding Xiaoling's shoulders with its short and powerful forelimbs. The weight of its whole body was pressing down on her like a mountain. Its back was slightly arched, it lowered its head, opened its mouth and bit her throat. At that moment, the only thought in Xiaoling's mind was that it was over. She didn't expect that not long after she was reborn, she would die at the hands of a leopard, which was a strange way to die. She was so unwilling, her free life had just begun, how could she die like this? Struggling subconsciously, she felt a sharp pain in her shoulder. She thought it was scratched by it. Unable to move any longer, Xiaoling watched its mouth approaching, closing her eyes and waiting for death. In a flash of lightning, a man's voice came, "Er Mao." It didn't make any sound, but to Xiaoling, it was like the sound of nature. The leopard's movement stopped abruptly. Its white teeth retreated a little from Xiaoling's throat, and its amber eyes looked at her coldly. Its heavy body was still pressing on her body, and its front paws firmly stepped on her wound, which made her suffocate. Hum. It growled low and flicked its tail threateningly. Xiaoling's whole body was stiff and she could no longer make a single sound. Not far away, the man's voice came again, with a bit of laziness, "I'm sorry, Mao is in a bad mood today, and you just happened to break into his territory. It turns out that this leopard is raised by someone, and his name is Mao." It lowered its head and stared at Xiaoling with its amber eyes, which had an inorganic quality unique to beasts, as if it were looking at a plate of lifeless food. The distance was too close. Xiaoling could even clearly see the human flesh fragments remaining around its mouth. Thinking of the half-corpse hanging upside down from the tree, she felt a twitching feeling in her stomach. The man's voice was unhurried, "Who are you? Why are you here?" He didn't tell Mao to let go of her, but the beast was still pressing on her. Through the thin coat, Xiaoling could feel it clinging to her huge body, and the rise and fall of her abdomen as she breathed. It made a vague grunt from its throat that sounded both threatening and impatient, leaving her with no doubt that as long as she disobeyed even a little bit, a terrible doom would be waiting for her. But she was speechless. The huge fright took away her ability to speak. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The man waited for a moment and chuckled, Mao, you scared our guests." He ordered it to let go of her, and the beast backed away obediently. Xiaoling felt a lightness on her body, and she had regained her freedom. His whole body was covered in human blood, and there were a few scattered bits of meat. The fishy and rotten smell hit her face. She turned over and got up from the ground. She didn't know whether it was because of the fright or the smoke. She held onto the tree and felt an overwhelming retching. "I didn't eat much before going out. I was almost exhausted from vomiting and only had sour water." She felt cramps in her stomach. She pressed her abdomen with her hands and bent over to breathe hard. The man's voice came again, Mao doesn't usually eat people, so you don't have to be afraid of this." "Normally don't eat people?" Then what did she see? Xiaoling tried her best not to think about the corpses on the branches not far away. She tried her best to calm down her emotions, and then she had time to turn her head and look in the direction where the voice came from. End of this chapter. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weining. Chapter 14. Chapter 14. What about the coldness and brutality promised? He was an extremely handsome man, probably of mixed race, with a face that combined the handsomeness of an Easterner with the sculptural profundity of a Westerner. His skin is a very healthy wheat color, and his eyes, against the clear sunlight in the forest, show an intoxicating dark green. His limbs are slender and well proportioned, and his slightly open clothes reveal just the right amount of muscles, making him look relaxed. Sitting under the tree, there was a sense of danger that could break out and hurt someone at any time. Xiaoling looked at him and took a cautious step back. He smiled, showing his white teeth. "I don't eat people either, in fact, I was injured," he said, spreading his hands innocently. She then noticed that there was a thick strip of cloth wrapped around his waist, with dark blood coming out of it. The leopard took a few restless steps beside him, and he reached out and patted its head as if to comfort it. "What's your name?" he asked her again. "Yasin Ling," she announced her name in this life. From the music video shooting team below. "Who are you?" she asked. He laughed again, but there was a slight coldness in his intoxicating dark green eyes. "Little beauty, you have to understand the situation. I am asking you now, Do you understand? The leopard roared lowly at her. Then she understood. I'm a trainee at Tianyi training camp, Xiaoling said resignedly. I'm here to shoot the MV with Tan Ying this time. He showed a satisfied expression and rubbed the soft fur on the back of the leopard's neck. Tan Ying is here too? You're lucky then, he asked her. Do you have his phone number? Let me borrow it? One time. Xiaoling really didn't want to borrow it, but the situation was better, so she had to take out her phone and throw it away. He caught it with one hand and dialed the number. Hello, Tan Ying? I'm not Yexing Ling, I'm your boss. Well, she finally knew who he was, Li Lei, the big boss of Tianyi, the legendary grandson of the legendary ruthless and violent underworld Li family. It's just, Xiaoling turned her head and glanced at him who was on the phone, and the low and lazy voice reached her ears intermittently. I'm in the mountains, I'm injured, come here quickly. What? Wait, your boss is about to die. No, no, don't bring Wei Shaiyin here, I don't want to experience the venomous tongue of that germaphobe. He changed into a comfortable position while talking on the phone, with a bit of coquettishness and grievance in his voice. At that moment, Xiaoling couldn't bear to look directly at. This is the legendary underworld. What about the coldness and brutality you promised? Before Xiaoling could finish being surprised, Li Lei had already hung up the phone and returned the phone to her. She silently looked at the mottled blood on her head. She didn't know whether it was from his injury or the blood from the leopard's corpse. Resisting the urge to throw it out, she thought in her mind that she should replace it when she got back. Tan Ying came very quickly and brought a whole team of people with him. They were all new faces and did not look like members of the film crew. Xiaoling guessed that they were probably the original staff of this mountain. They silently and quickly set up the stretcher and put Li Lei on it. They were methodical and well trained. While busy, I could faintly hear Tan Ying's anxious voice. How are you doing? Does it matter? The gunshot wound has avoided the vital part, so you can't die. Li Lei's tone was lazy, but it had a strange soothing power. Tan Ying, please have someone check the area to see if there are any other killers. There is no need to look at the corpse on the tree, leave it to Ermao for dinner. Besides, he said, looking sideways at Xiaoling, the little beauty over there is also injured, please ask someone to take care of it. Tan Ying responded one by one, glanced at Xiaoling, and ordered, give her a stretcher and come with us. From the beginning to the end, no one said a word to her, and no one asked her for her opinion, whether it hurt or if she wanted to go together. If it was in the previous life, Xiaoling would have fallen out with her a long time ago, but now it is no different than in the past. Without Pei Xian's blessing, she no longer has any halo on her body, and must learn to get used to the life of a little person. Fortunately, before meeting Pei Xian, she had also endured 12 years of hardship in an orphanage, experiencing the warmth of human nature. Now she just needs to regain her plainness and anonymity. Perhaps, this is what she should be like. Him obediently got on the stretcher and followed them to the building complex on the top of the mountain. They settled Xiaoling in the guest room, and a full-time doctor came to check her injuries and applied medicine and bandage. It's just a flesh wound, not touching the muscles and bones. Rest for a few days, don't touch water, don't eat spicy food, it will be cured soon, the doctor said to her. Xiaoling smiled and nodded, but as soon as the doctor left, she turned and entered the bathroom. Turn on the shoryad, fill the bathtub halfway with water, and then immerse as much of her body in it as possible. The clean and warm water surrounded her, and with the water vapor, there was a faint trace of blood lingering on her body. Xiaoling struggled to clean her body with her left hand, carefully avoiding the wound on her right shoulder. However, the smell of blood seemed to be getting stronger and stronger, rushing straight into her nose. The image of the leopard pounced on her kept flashing in her mind. In a trance, he turned into a huge and ferocious mastiff, half as tall as a man, with shiny black fur. It also tried to attack her, Its heavy body pounced on her again and again. In the dark basement of Payzian's isolated villa, she desperately avoided the mastiff, frantically banging on the door and calling for help, but the prison door was closed and no one came to her aid. That was the scariest day of her life. Even now, thinking about it, I still tremble all over. Before that day, she was not docile to Payzian. Even though she was under house arrest in the villa, she still made noises with him and disobeyed his every order. He always said, "Xiaoling, one day I will run out of patience with you." That day has finally arrived. On her 28th birthday. Early in the morning, he picked a bouquet of bright red roses and placed them beside her bed, then leaned down and touched her lips. Xiaoling tried her best to dodge his lips, but her chin was clamped, and her hands were clasped behind her back on the bed. She watched helplessly as the handsome face came closer and closer, and the lips smelling of red wine and lemon captured hers. She bit him hard. The taste of blood spread between his lips and teeth. He let her go, with a fleeting look of shock and anger in his eyes. She yelled, "Get out of here! You beast!" He looked at her gloomily, his eyes were terrifyingly cold, but then he casually wiped the blood on his lower lip with his hand. "Beast? Then I'll let you see what a real beast is." She was dragged out of the bedroom by him and thrown into a basement. The door was slammed shut and locked. It was very dark in the basement, and she could only vaguely see the outlines of things. She heard a frantic barking sound, and a huge shadow rushed towards her. End of this chapter. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weining. Chapter 15. Chapter 15. Recuperating at the big boss's villa. She screamed and staggered back toward the corner. It wasn't until the shadow hit something unknown and made a loud clang that she discovered that there was an iron fence in the middle of the basement, separating her from the huge shadow. That huge shadow is a purebred mastiff. She has been afraid of dogs since she was a child, let alone purebred mastiffs. In order to prevent her from escaping, Payzian specially kept a dozen of these mastiff dogs around the villa, but she did not expect that they could be put to such use. She was locked up for a whole night. In the darkness, the only sound was the barking of the mastiff and the sound of it constantly hitting the iron fence and trying to bite her. She was so frightened that she cursed Payzian in the most vicious words in the world, and begged him in the most humble manner. In the end, she screamed and became hoarse, curled up in the corner and trembled like a ball of chaff. Even her consciousness was in a trance. She didn't know when Payzian opened the basement door. I could only hear his condescending voice, "Do you still want to see the beast?" Her lips trembled and she could not speak. His feet stopped in front of her. "Admit your mistake, and I will take you away." She didn't know how she recognized her mistake. She vaguely remembered that he leaned over to pick her up and took her back to the original bedroom. That bedroom was also a prison cell, with cameras, shackles, and tight security everywhere, but the bright light and soft bed made her find an unprecedented sense of security. She collapsed on the bed and fell asleep. She had a high fever for a week and kept having nightmares, in which she saw the ferocious appearance of a mastiff. After recovering from the illness, she docilely lay in Payzian's arms, no longer resisting, and accepted all his embraces and possessions. It was as if she was still the same Xiaoling who loved him deeply and regarded him as the only in the world. The memories gradually fade away, and the water in the bathtub flows slowly, and I don't know when it will fill up. The warm water flooded Xiaoling's whole body and also wetted the wound on her right shoulder. Her vision was blurry, her eyes were full of water, and there was a salty taste in her mouth. She clutched the towel tightly and wiped her body desperately, trying to get rid of the endless blood and the smell of beasts on her body, but she kept wiping until her skin was painful and red, but the smell still lingered. Finally, she threw the towel into the bathtub, curled up and hugged herself. The water was gurgling in her ears, like a gentle and sad song, as if she was gently telling how great it would be if she could turn back time, Let her go back to the summer when the iris was in full bloom when she was 12 years old, and reach out to that man. Say no with your hands, let everything begin and end at that most beautiful moment. If that were the case, it would be great to have it. Later, I regained consciousness in bed. Elegantly decorated ceilings, graceful crystal chandeliers, and soft bedding. Someone shouted something loudly in her ears, and Xiaoling spent a lot of effort to finally hear it. Yeah, damn you. It was Tan Ying who yelled, with an angry face. Xiaoling took a while to remember her current situation. She opened her mouth to say something, but was stopped by the person next to her. Miss Ye, you have lost too much blood now. It's best not to talk and rest. At this moment, she felt dizzy and her body was limp and without any strength. It seemed that she had really lost too much blood. So she shut up obediently. Tan Ying watched the people change the diaphragm for her, waited for everyone to leave, then sat by the bed and said to her, Yes, Yingling, you are really looking for trouble for me. All the trainees will leave for the city tomorrow, but you are here. Something happened at the right time, and I was seriously injured. Xiaoling looked at him quietly and said nothing. Although the heavy bleeding was caused by her own bathing, in the final analysis it was because she was caught by the beast raised by Li Lei. She didn't want to get hurt, so why didn't he blame Li Lei? But thinking about it, he wouldn't go to the boss to make trouble. She would tolerate this. Tan Ying continued talking to herself, you will definitely not be able to walk due to your injury. I have already said hello to the boss. You will stay here to recuperate during this period. When the situation improves, you will go back to the training camp. He paused. After a pause, he added, the boss will also rest here for a period of time. You'd better not go out and wander around and don't disturb him. She understood that the previous explanations were all false, but the last sentence of don't disturb the boss Li Lei was true. However, even if he didn't tell her, she wouldn't go out and wander around. With the leopard around, she would only look for trouble when she was full. Xiaoling nodded obediently. Tan Ying showed a satisfied expression and continued to explain, also, regarding today's matters, don't ask what you shouldn't ask. When you return to the training camp after a while, don't say what you shouldn't say. Do you understand? She understands that in the underworld, there are always secrets of one kind or another. Now that I think about it, not everyone in the industry knows about Li Lei's background. Xiaoling knew that he was related to the notorious Li family because she overheard Pei Xian talking about it. Pei Xian also said at that time that Tianyi was very low-key and never deliberately publicized its backers. If he didn't go out of his way to check, it would be impossible to know. So, as a small ordinary trainee, she would not know this. It's no wonder that Tan Ying would warn that most people would realize that something was abnormal when they saw the previous battle. Xiaoling looked at Tan Ying and said with difficulty, don't worry, I don't have any curiosity. Tan Ying smiled a little ferociously, it doesn't matter if you are curious. There is a kind of person who will never be able to speak. Intimidation, this is absolutely naked intimidation. Xiaoling frowned, with a hint of boredom in her tone, don't worry, Mr. Tan, I don't want to die yet. After a pause, I'm tired and want to rest, you should go. Tan Ying narrowed his eyes and looked at her. After a while, he said, yes Yingling, I find that I can't understand you more and more. Should I say that you are crazy or stupid or bold? However, this is better than losing your life. He said, clapped his hands and stood up, then I'll leave. If you need anything, just call me. In addition, if you need anything here, you can contact the staff directly. Xiaoling watched him leave. Before leaving, he carefully closed the door for her. The room fell silent, she dimmed the lights, lay down on the quilt and fell asleep. The days of recuperation have begun. In this mountain, the years are very peaceful, with an intoxicating length and ease. Every morning, Xiaoling would make a pot of fruit tea and read a few pages on the terrace on the second floor of the guest room. Sometimes she would be in a daze to relax her mind that had been filled with complicated thoughts for a long time. Li Lei never showed up. In fact, apart from the cleaning and food delivery staff, Xiaoling only met one other person once, that was the housekeeper of this villa, who brought her a large bouquet of hibiscus on Li Lei's order. It is a flower that changes color. It is an elegant white in the morning, and turns to a burning red in the afternoon. It is delicate and charming, and it is pleasing to the eye. The housekeeper said that this was boss's apology for her injury. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weiniang. Chapter 16. Chapter 16 Modification of Music Score. Xiaoling was a little disapproving. After suffering so much, he just used a bouquet of flowers to get over it. But then I thought about it, she didn't have to pay for the medical expenses, and not only took the initiative to treat her, but also provided her with free food and accommodation in the VIP room of this huge villa, which was considered the most benevolent thing. The place where she lives now is a VIP room in the true sense. Different from the guest rooms halfway up the mountain that were probably for the accompanying servants when filming the music video before, everything here is elegant. The thick and soft carpet can sink into your ankles when you step on it, the small bar at the corner is stocked with a variety of famous wines, the scene-like ceiling and walls can change various light and shadow effects, combined with the extremely natural fragrance and sound effects, starry sky, ocean desert. It can be seen that the owner here is a person who knows how to enjoy life. Even with her, she lived a comfortable life for a few days. It is undeniable that moderate enjoyment can make people happy both physically and mentally. But it only took a few days for Xiaoling to become restless. Doing nothing was not her habit. When people live in this world, they always have to do something. I remembered that since my rebirth, I have spent most of my time practicing dancing. Now that my dancing postures have become in tune with my body, I can't let my singing voice fall behind. After all, although she has dabbled in many fields, she is fundamentally a singer first. Her voice in this life is completely different from her voice in the previous life. This is a talent given by God and cannot be changed by human beings. In her previous life, she had a beautiful voice and a wide vocal range. It was effortless to sing high notes or low notes. Melodies that were very difficult for other singers became easy for her. Xiaoling thought sadly, maybe this was the reason why Pei Ziyan selected her from the orphanage in the first place. Not only did she have an outstanding appearance, but she also had a uniquely good voice. Perhaps, what Pei Ziyan wanted from the beginning was just a perfect artist, and she just happened to meet his conditions. In this life, she looks much more ordinary. Not only does her appearance lose her stunning appearance and can only be considered delicate, her vocal range is also much narrower. The melody that she could sing easily in her previous life will take a lot more effort in this life. However, congenital deficiencies are not impossible to make up for through the day after tomorrow. It is nothing more than putting in more effort than others. After all, music is the sound flowing from the bottom of the heart, existing deep in everyone's soul, just like the stones lying quietly in the stream. Although the postures are different, as long as you use enough patience to carve and polish, each piece can be exudes a unique brilliance. What she has to do is to find a way to express her voice that is suitable for this life. In the days that followed, she tried to sing songs from her previous life. As expected, there were many twists and turns and she couldn't do it. She recorded these places one by one, sorted them into categories, and sorted out which problems could be overcome after practice and which ones were problems. Differences in talent are inevitable, and which ones are not suitable for today's timbres need to be improved. Then deal with different situations. Her purpose is not to cover these songs, but to familiarize and perfect her voice in this life through such modifications. As the problems continued to be solved, these songs were changed beyond recognition by her, and they were gradually reorganized, showing a different style. Familiar yet unfamiliar, it surprised and fascinated her. On this day, Xiaoling leaned on the handrail of the terrace and sang a song she loved in her previous life. Amber sandalwood dyed red sleeves and a long piano in hand. Sing you a song of prosperity and prosperity. Horse hoofs trample peach blossoms to pieces. The battle between white bones and yellow sand. Jianmenguan. Yongding River. Whose world? The ancient charm is far away, and the sadness and beauty are accompanied by a murderous intention. It is a gorgeous show-off skills. She liked it in her previous life, mostly because few people could sing it completely. It was undeniable that for a while she liked to see the gnashing of teeth on the faces of the artists who hated her. At that time, they always said that she was just born with a good voice. Now that her good voice was gone, Xiaoling tried many different singing methods and adjusted the melody. Little by little, she got this unruly song in her hands until it became smooth. She sang it all over again and was satisfied. Suddenly, applause broke out from nowhere. Xiaoling was caught off guard and was startled. A stack of manuscript paper on her hand floated down and scattered among the grass and trees downstairs. She lowered her head and saw two men standing under a phoenix tree. They were Li Lei and Wei Shaiyan, looking up at her. "Hi, little beauty." Li Lei put one hand in his trouser pocket and waved to her frivolously with the other hand. "He looks healthy today and does not look injured at all. I think the wound should be much better." She was wearing a silk satin shirt with a delicate texture, as elegant as moonlight, with a dark pattern embroidered on the lapel. It was slightly open at this time, revealing the well-proportioned wheat-colored chest muscles underneath. It was obviously a difficult style to control, but when he wore it casually, it didn't feel inconsistent at all. On the contrary, it was simply heart-pounding. Xiaoling couldn't help but think that if such a person became an artist, he would become famous based on his appearance alone. The thoughts in my mind went around a few times, but on the surface, I just looked at him calmly. "My name is Yexin Ling." "Okay, Yexin Ling." He changed the title in a polite manner. "What song did you sing just now? It's really nice." "Xiaoling's dying the fragrance of the piano," she said. "This song is extremely famous. It won 3 authoritative awards when it was first released. It was very popular for a while and is now regarded as a classic, but he didn't realize it." "How can you open an entertainment company if you don't even know this song?" Wei Shaiyan's slightly sarcastic voice came from the side of the ear. "Like Li Lei, he also wears a white shirt, but the difference is that he wears a completely plain white shirt, extremely simple, and he buttons it all the way to the last button, rigorously, perfectly, and impeccably." Xiaoling was a little surprised. Tianyi employees could actually talk to their boss like this? In the past at Emperor, Pei Xian was the absolute boss, domineering and inviolable, so much so that no employee had ever dared to adopt such a tone. She couldn't help but glance at Li Lei. Li Lei didn't seem to take this small offense to heart, and smiled good-naturedly. "That's why we need an elite like you to be in charge." Away then he tilted his head and thought, "But after being treated like this by you," said, "I really think I heard it somewhere. Wait, the tune I heard before is different from this time. You can't blame me for not recognizing it." Wei Shaiyan raised her eyebrows slightly. "After all, you still know." He bent down to pick up the music scores she had scattered on the ground, and flipped through them, with a hint of surprise on his face. "You changed all these?" "Yexin Ling." "Yes. They are all Xiaoling's songs. I didn't expect you to know her so well." Wei Shaiyan's eyes were more thoughtful. "I'm Xiaoling's fan," Xiaoling said lightly. The identity Lu Tao forced her to give her last time was really useful. Wei Shaiyan smiled. "Xiaoling's song is not suitable for your voice quality, but after you changed it like this, it has a different charm." Excellent, she said politely. Wei Yin didn't care about the coldness in her tone, and raised the music score in her hand. Lend me to go back and take a look. End of this chapter. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weining. Chapter 17. Chapter 17. Lunch with a beautiful man. It was not something important. Xiaoling made a pleased gesture. Wei Yin said hello to Li Lei, took the music score and left in a hurry. Xiaoling looked at his back and thought, she had heard rumors in the industry that he was a workaholic, and it seemed true. Li Lei was the only one left under the lush phoenix tree. Xiaoling looked at him while holding onto the railing of the balcony on the second floor. He looked at her for a moment and smiled lazily. Do you still like the hibiscus that the housekeeper sent you before? She thought of the bouquet of flowers in the room. It's very beautiful, thank you. So his smile deepened. I was speechless for a moment. Xiaoling didn't want to have anything to do with him, so she bowed and wanted to leave, but he stopped her. Wait a minute, Yesin Ling. Is there anything else, Mr. Boss? She stopped and turned around to ask. In the bright autumn light, he was leaning against the phoenix tree with a cloud-like crown. The golden and clear sunlight shone on his face, and as his smile flickered, there was an elusive temptation. He said, I originally made an appointment with Wei to have lunch, so I took a shortcut to your place. I heard you singing, so I stopped and enjoyed it for a while. But who knew, you abducted him. How could this be so strange to her? Wei Yin wanted to borrow her music scores for study. She was just a young trainee at the bottom of the company. How could she stop the company's chief producer? Li Lei continued talking on his own, so, why don't you have lunch with me? Xiaoling was a little surprised at this invitation. It's boring to eat alone, he said and laughed again. It's a very delicious meal, I won't lie to you. I'm sorry, boss, my injury is not healed yet and I need to rest. Please forgive me for not being able to accompany you. You'd better find someone else. She refused as politely as possible. It's him who finds eating alone boring, not her. On the contrary, she quite likes to stay here alone. There are so many tones to practice, who can bear to entertain the big boss? There seemed to be a flash of surprise in Li Lei's eyes, probably because he didn't expect anyone to reject him. That's right, Xiaoling thought, he is the eldest grandson of the underworld Li family and the big boss of Tianyi. He is the proud son of heaven. He has always been used to being followed by others, so he thinks that no matter what he says, others will obey him unconditionally. She knew all too well that these rich people all had the same problems. But in just a short moment, Li Lei regained his lazy smile. It's better to meet by chance than to invite me. As a guest, don't you plan to give the host this honor? Xiaoling frowned slightly, sensing the faint pressure in his words. Having said that, it would be obviously disrespectful for her not to go. People had to bow their heads under the eaves, and she sighed in her heart. She had no choice but to agree, turned around, and wanted to go downstairs to accept the appointment. However, he suddenly remembered something, returned to the railing, and looked downstairs warily. Li Lei saw through her thoughts at a glance. Mao is not here. She breathed a sigh of relief and relaxed. Fortunately, the leopard was not there, otherwise, even at the risk of offending the boss, she would never eat this meal. She said to Li Lei, please wait a moment, I will change my clothes and come down. The weather in the mountains was a bit cold. Xiaoling picked out a light flaxen long skirt from the closet, put on a thin coat, packed it properly, and then went downstairs. When he saw Li Lei, he was not impatient at all. Instead, he looked her up and down, with some admiration in his deep dark green eyes. This long skirt suits you very well. Thank you, she said. Looking at Li Lei from a close distance, he looked more handsome than from a distance. His narrow eyes were slightly raised, his thin lips pursed slightly, and there was a faint smile. Wearing two soldier tags on a bead chain around his neck, they were made of an unknown material and had a faint metallic luster, reflecting his slightly dark skin color, giving him a wild beauty that seemed to be innate to him. For a while, it was very popular in the industry to use soldier cards as decoration, but he was unique in wearing it so well. Li Lei stood up straight and led Xiaoling forward, chatting, "Are you afraid of Ermao?" Xiaoling was silent for a moment. In addition to fear, there is also hatred. Ever since she was treated like that by Pei Xian, not only Ao Quan but also all beasts of similar size have made her stay away, especially this leopard that scratched her. But she couldn't say these words to Li Lei. She only said, "Animal, a beast is a beast." After all, she originally wanted to say animal, but she changed her mind because he was the big boss. Li Lei was unimpressed. Many times, they are much more loyal than humans. It can be seen that the leopard is indeed very kind to him. Although no one told her, judging from the last encounter, she guessed that a killer attacked Li Lei and was killed by a leopard. When he was injured, the leopard was so restless, obviously worried and anxious. Therefore, they will never have a common language on this topic. She then asked lightly, "What are you preparing for lunch?" Li Lei glanced at her, smiled slightly, and changed the topic, "You'll know when the time comes." Xiaoling originally didn't have much expectations for lunch, but his curiosity aroused her curiosity. After following him for a long time along the winding mountain road, a delicate fairy stood in front of him amid the flowers and trees. There is a small raft by the water, with only room for 2 people, except for the boatman holding the pole. Li Lei stepped forward first, and then extended his hand like a gentleman, intending to help her. Xiaoling turned slightly to avoid him. "I can do it myself." He raised his eyebrows slightly and retracted his hand very naturally, as if no rejection had ever happened. She couldn't help but admire his good manners. It was really not easy for a big boss to give face to low-level employees like this. While thinking about it, she stepped onto the raft lightly, with excellent balance, not even causing the slightest shaking of the raft. She lifted her skirt slightly and sat down, raised her head, and met his smiling eyes. "Tan Ying has a good eye for selecting people," he said. Huh, she was a little stunned. The topic was changed too quickly. Li Lei said, "I've been practicing dancing for a long time. I don't look like a first or second grade trainee." She felt a chill in her heart. She didn't expect his vision to be so sophisticated. How could this person, who obviously couldn't even hear a famous song like "Dying the Fragrance of the Piano," be able to see through the dance she had practiced for a long time at a glance? She answered carefully, "I liked dancing when I was a child. My family sent me to a children's dance class and I have been practicing since I was a child." He smiled slightly and said nothing more. She always felt a little uneasy in her heart, fearing that he would see something, so she asked tentatively, "Are you very knowledgeable about dance?" "Research is out of the question," he replied nonchalantly. "A few days ago, when Awei was torturing you kids, I took a few glances from a distance. The other people are not on the same level as you." End of this chapter. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weining. Chapter 18. Chapter 18. I feel so insecure. It turned out to be a comparison. Xiaoling felt relieved and said, "Thank you, but what's going on with you kids?" She glanced at Li Lei and saw that he was only 24 or 5 years old. If you really wanted to count, he was a little younger than she was in her previous life. Li Lei was unaware of her thoughts and ordered the waiter to serve the food. The waiters in uniforms carried elegant wooden trays and quietly served them delicacies one after another. Xiaoling watched quietly. It was indeed very rich. Steamed sea bass, cumin barbecue, longjing shrimps, corn pine nuts, etc. were placed on exquisite sweet white porcelain plates. "Move and work up an appetite." He poured the wine for her in a very gentlemanly manner. The rose-like color shone in the amber cup, and there was a faint fragrance lingering. "This is the berry wine brewed by the mountain village," he said. "Try it, it's very appetizing." She took a brief sip and found that it was indeed a good wine. It was slightly warm in the mouth, with a delicate and subtle change of aroma in the sweetness, and an endless aftertaste. In her previous life, she had seen a lot of wine with Paysian. At this moment, she could tell that this wine was not as careless as he said. Even if it was brewed by the villa, it must have been made by a famous master and had an extraordinary origin. But he never mentioned it and had no intention of showing off. Xiaoling couldn't help but take another look at him, and felt a little favorable for him inexplicably. The pole holder gently paddles the bamboo pole in his hand, and the raft drifts along the water, slowly passing through the green mountains and green waters. Along the way, Li Lei chatted with her casually, and before he knew it, the raft had made many twists and turns in the river. The scenery of the green mountains on both sides of the bank changed, and houses and people could no longer be seen from far and near. Li Lei told her that the river was called the Sauvignon Blanc River. It twisted and flowed through several nearby peaks. Now they were no longer in the original mountain. He peeled off a piece of orange and handed it to her. "After eating the fruit and resting for a while, we can reach another ferry. From there we change the cable car back to the villa. You can see Yujing Lake and wild fields halfway up the mountain. A flock of swans." He speaks with a smile and is a very competent host. Although Xiaoling felt that having a meal and walking around all over the mountains was a bit of a hassle, the more than a year of imprisonment in her previous life, coupled with the training life of rarely going out in this life, was too boring, and she didn't realize that she was tired of him. The wild swans in the mouth are full of expectations. It's a pity that God did not fulfill people's wishes. When the heavy rain fell, they were all caught off guard and were drenched all over their faces. Li Lei used his arms to protect his abdominal wound, and he did not forget to command the pole supporter, "Old Chen, please quickly find a shelter from the rain nearby." The pole holder responded loudly, and the pole was swung like clouds and flowing water. The small raft suddenly picked up speed and smoothly and skillfully made its way through 9 twists and turns and arrived in front of a hidden cave. Li Lei took the lead on the shore and stretched out his hand to help her. This time, Xiaoling did not refuse him. The main reason was that the wound on her shoulder, which was not fully healed, was in severe pain due to the rain. She could not lift her entire arm and could not maintain her balance. Li Lei half dragged her to the shore. She was in a mess, unsteady, and was suddenly swept into his arms. Li Lei's chest was so hard, as if it were made of iron, which made the tip of her nose hurt. Xiaoling panicked for a moment and struggled a few times before she regained her balance. He let go of his hand and looked at her with a half smile. "It's raining and the ground is slippery. This is not the time to show off." She covered the tip of her nose in embarrassment and said nothing. I don't know if it was an illusion, but she always felt that there was something behind his words. Could it be that he was still resentful of her previous rejection? However, in just a moment, he left her behind and walked back inside, with a steady pace, and there was no sign of an unhealed injury. Xiaoling was surprised. No way, his was a gunshot wound, so it must be more serious than hers. Now she is still in pain, but he seems to be fine? At this time, the pole slinger parked the raft and went ashore. Seeing Xiaoling, he said politely, "Miss, you can go inside too. It's windy at the entrance of the cave and it's easy to catch a cold. It's enough for me to stay here alone." Xiaoling nodded and walked in the direction Li Lei left before. The cave was not deep, but it was curved into a semicircle. When she turned to the innermost part to find Li Lei, she could no longer see the pole holder outside. At this time, Li Lei had taken off his coat, exposing his upper body, with well-proportioned and tight muscles. She noticed that there was gauze wrapped around his waist, and there was faint blood oozing from it. It was obvious that the wound was not fully healed. Looking at his nonchalant look before, I really couldn't tell. In addition, there are many old scars crisscrossing his body, deep and shallow, and of different sizes. Many of them were ferocious and terrifying, and one even penetrated from the left shoulder to the right waist, looking like it could split a person in half. She couldn't help but wonder, how did he get injured like this, and what kind of experience did he have? As she thought about it, she continued to move forward, her footsteps very light and not noticeable in the sound of wind and rain. But the moment she was about to approach him, he noticed her and suddenly raised his head, a sharp cold light burst out from his narrow gray-green eyes. Xiaoling's heart instinctively tightened. The moment she was locked with his gaze, it was as if an invisible hand was strangling her throat, making her whole body stiff and unable to move. The cold aura has substance, is it, murderous aura? However, in the flash of lightning, he had averted his gaze and returned to his usual lazy smile. It's you, Yesin Ling. Take off your clothes and come over to warm yourself by the fire. It's easy to get sick in this weather. She breathed a sigh of relief, otherwise who did he think she was? After calming down her abnormally fast heartbeat, Xiaoling thought to herself that she had been frightened twice after seeing him twice. She really didn't feel safe staying with the underworld. It would be better to stay away from this person in the future. He carefully approached and sat down opposite him farthest from him. He found firewood from nowhere, started a fire skillfully, and said to her, "The weather in the mountains is changeable. Lao Chen and the others have been here for a long time and are very familiar with places that can take shelter from the rain. This cave is safe if you step on it, don't worry." What should she worry about? On the first day she came to shoot the location, Tan Ying said that there were no wild beasts in the mountains near and far. What's more, since Li Lei was injured last time, I heard from the housekeeper that the entire mountain has been under martial law. Before the raft came all the way, I didn't know how many guards I saw overtly and covertly. To say he was worried, it was because he was worried. The look he looked at her just now was too obviously aggressive. The warm orange-red flames jumped up. She put her hand on it to warm the fire, and asked strangely, where did the firewood come from? There are always supplies in the cave, just in case someone is in urgent need when they are alone in the wild. Li Lei said, when we go back, Lao Chen will add a new batch of food, oh, and dry food. He pointed his chin towards the compressed biscuits piled not far away, signaled. They had just had lunch and were not hungry, so they didn't touch it. Li Lei watched her warming herself over the fire with half-squinted eyes, and his eyes suddenly became a little dark. She was sensitive to his changes and lowered her head. Only then did she realize that her whole body was soaked by the rain. The already thin linen skirt and hook pattern coat clung to her body, outlining her concave and convex shape. Her figure is so beautiful, even the skin under her dress is looming, making people think. She was startled and instinctively covered her chest with her hands. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weining. Chapter 19. Chapter 19, Change into a Shirt. He gave a low laugh. The ambiguous laughter made her glare at him coldly, and she covered her chest tighter with her hands. Don't be so guarded, little beauty, he sat casually by the fire, no longer looking at her, only concentrating on baking his shirt that was soaked by the rain. The shirt was made of silk, and it dried quickly under his skillful baking. He threw the shirt to her casually, take it and change out of all the wet clothes on your body. Xiaoling didn't expect him to be so kind, and was a little stunned for a moment. Why are you dazed, he said with a half-smile, or do you like to be half-hearted in front of me like this? Shameless, your whole family is. She originally wanted to scold him and his whole family for being half-hearted, but suddenly she saw his well-proportioned muscular upper body illuminated by the firelight. She couldn't help but blush, grabbed his shirt and walked away. His cheerful laughter came from behind. Xiaoling was sulking while changing clothes with her back to him. She quickly took off her hookup coat. However, when her fingers touched the dress underneath, she hesitated and did not untie it. The inner one can be taken off at the same time, he said lazily. I am taller than you, and the shirt is long enough, so you don't have to worry about your view being exposed. He was right, this silk shirt reached just to the middle of her thighs, so there was no need to worry about exposure. However, in her previous life, she had been imprisoned by Peizian for a full year. During that year, she had hardly worn a complete and decent piece of clothing, so that now she was extremely afraid and repelled by incomplete clothing. This is especially true in front of men. Xiaoling suppressed the dryness in her voice. No need, this is fine. Li Lei glanced at her thoughtfully. He is the direct grandson of the Li family. He grew up with a silver spoon in his mouth. Over the past 20 years, countless women have tried to curry favor with him and crawl into his bed. They have tried all kinds of means. However, there has never been anyone like her. In this way, even though her whole body was soaked by the heavy rain, and the opportunity to seduce him was right in front of her, she wrapped herself up tightly, fearing that he would take advantage of her. It's really fun. The corners of his lips were slightly raised in an imperceptible arc, and he stopped trying to persuade her. Xiaoling only felt throbbing pain from the wound on her shoulder. Half of her arm was so weak that she could hardly lift it. She put on his dry shirt with difficulty, buttoned every button, then dragged her wet dress back to the fire. The warm firelight danced, setting off his handsome face. She said to him politely, "Thank you." He looked at her sideways for a moment, then suddenly raised his hand and said, "Come here." She was confused. "What?" "Come here." There was a smile in his tone, but there was also an irresistible coercion in his tone. It was the coldness and dominance of someone who has been in power for a long time. Xiaoling thought for a while and didn't want to conflict with him, so she walked up to him with some doubts. He said, "Sit down." She sat down, and before she could realize what was going on, she was already pulled into his arms. "What are you doing?" She couldn't help but turned pale and instinctively stretched out her hand to push him. This man, how could this man be so rogue? He had one hand around her waist and the other hand was unbuttoning her shirt. "Be good, don't move," he said in a casual tone, easily suppressing all her struggles and holding her hands behind her back. The arm around her waist clasped both of her wrists at the same time, and the iron-like force came from her, preventing her from moving at all. "Li Lei, let me go." Xiaoling was extremely angry and raised her head to glare at him. He lowered his head and looked at her, his green eyes as deep as a bottomless pool of water, unpredictable and difficult to fathom. From his pupils, she could only see her pale and helpless self. Unknowingly, she became quiet. He smiled slowly and spoke softly, "Don't look like you're about to be raped. I just want to help you button it up again." "You just buttoned it crookedly," he said, looking down slowly from her face. He scanned it slowly and paused for a few seconds at the place where her clothes were unbuttoned on her chest. "I admit, you have a good figure and your appearance suits my taste." Xiaoling's body became stiff in an instant. He felt it immediately and patted her back comfortingly. "Don't be afraid, I'm not interested in forcing people. It's just that you are so afraid of me, which really makes me sad." While he was talking, he was rebuttoning her shirt. Time passed so long, Xiaoling prayed to God to let him finish the job quickly and let her go, but the more anxious he was, the slower his movements became. She couldn't help but secretly hate that she could button the button crookedly no matter how hard she buttoned it. Taking advantage of the opportunity. I also regretted why I took his shirt and wore it. It was neither a relative nor a friend. How could he, a big boss, be so kind? As if 10,000 years had passed, he finally buttoned the last button around my neck, and touched her small chin with his slightly rough thumb and index finger. Okay, his voice was as low as a whisper, and his breath was like a feather. Brushed her cheek. She only felt her body relax, and he had let her go. She hurriedly left his arms, subconsciously retreated to a safe distance, and let out a long breath. There were drops of water falling into my eyes, and when I touched my forehead, I was covered in cold sweat. He was still sitting casually by the fire, leaning his chin on one hand and looking at her. I told you, you don't have to be afraid of this. Xiaoling also knew that she was overreacting, but no one would understand what she had encountered in Pei Xian's villa. To this day, it has become her instinct to resist the touch of others. She lowered her head to hide the strange color in her eyes. But he felt happy when he heard Li Lei's tone. Hey, Ermao. No way, it's coming too. Xiaoling looked over subconsciously and saw a muscular leopard standing quietly not far away, with beautiful rose markings all over its body, and a pair of amber eyes looking at them quietly. It must have been found in a heavy rain, and the fur all over its body was soaked through. Countless water droplets flowed down its strong and elegant body, forming a small puddle on the ground. Xiaoling felt that all the hairs on her body were standing on end. Facing a ferocious beast at close range was definitely not a pleasant experience. Li Lei's smile grew brighter and he opened his arms towards the leopard. Mao, come here. Huabao tilted his head slightly and stared at Li Lei for a moment, as if he was checking whether there were any new injuries on his master's body. Then he narrowed his eyes with satisfaction, took a few steps back, took a running start, and rushed towards Li Lei. Ouch! Li Lei was thrown to the ground by the beast, but he still smiled in his voice. Mao, you are so dirty, I was just dried and wet, don't rub, I told you not to rub. He and the leopard rolled around on the ground a few times. The leopard buried its head in his arms and rubbed it around. He rubbed its fur with his hands and had a great time. Xiaoling stared at them dumbfounded. That leopard, then, is it really a leopard? No matter how you look at it, you think it is a large pet dog. Just barely wagging his tail at his master. End of this chapter. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weining. Chapter 20. Chapter 20. Rich people are really jerks. She seemed to understand a little bit why such a ferocious beast was named Mao. This guy's coquettish behavior was completely different from the cannibalism that day. Finally, the two guys had enough water and mud on the ground and returned to the fire in disgrace. Xiaoling found that Li Lei's wound seemed to be somewhat cracked, and the smell of blood spread and echoed in the small cave. He lowered his head and untied the gauze from his waist, and retreated his wound. His technique was so skillful that he was even more professional than a professional medical staff. Mao lay lazily next to him, his huge head resting on his front paws, his eyes half closed as if sleeping. Not sure if it was an illusion, but Xiaoling always felt that its eyes never left her. It was not interested in the smell of blood coming from its master. It seemed that this guy knew very clearly what he could and could not eat. Li Lei scraped away the blood around the wound without blinking an eye. His actions made Xiaoling feel pain, but he acted as if nothing had happened and did not even frown. While treating the wound, he comforted her. It's raining heavily in the mountains. Mao is just worried that something will happen to me, so he came here. You don't have to be afraid of it. You are wearing my clothes, and it won't touch you. However, why did she feel that these words were not convincing at all? The leopard looked at her with unfriendly eyes, which made her feel like it would pounce on her and bite her to death at any time. Xiaoling took a deep breath, faced its gaze and mustered up the courage to speak. Boss, I'm going to the cave entrance to get some air. Li Lei looked up at her, then at Mao, and finally gave up on letting the man and the leopard coexist peacefully. Forget it, go ahead, it really doesn't bite. Xiaoling remained unmoved and leaned away. Lao Chen at the entrance of the cave was not surprised when he saw her coming out. He smiled and said, Miss, come over and warm yourself by the fire. I just saw Mao go in, so I guessed you were going to come out. Oh, she looked at him puzzled. Old Chen fiddled with the fire with a dead branch. The leopard raised by the young master grew up eating blood. Although it usually does not hurt people without reason, it always has a wild spirit, and most people will be afraid when they see it. Lao Chen is not considered a member of Tianyi Company, but is just a personal servant of the Li family in this villa, so he is not called Li Lei boss, only young master. Are you afraid? With nothing going on, Xiaoling simply chatted with Lao Chen. Surprisingly, Lao Chen shook his head. I was scared at first, but later I found out that Mao had saved the young master's life several times, so I wasn't so scared anymore. Miss, let me tell you, this leopard is spiritual, and all spiritual animals are. No nonsense. She responded one after another, looking through the fire and looking at the rain curtain outside the cave. Thinking to himself, it's no wonder Li Lei smiled so happily when he saw the leopard, and his expression was much softer than when he faced her. Having been in the entertainment industry for a lifetime in her previous life, she still had this kind of sharp eyesight. When Li Lei faced her, although he behaved thoughtfully and spoke teasingly, his eyes were always dark, but when he faced that leopard, the tenderness and intimacy shown are truly from the heart. The more she got around, the more she went back. Well, in the eyes of the big boss, she was worse than a leopard. The rain was pouring down outside the cave, and the fire had been burning for a long time, and my body gradually felt warm. Xiaoling leaned her head against the cave wall and took a nap for a while. She didn't know what she was dreaming about, and her sleep was not peaceful. The wound on her shoulder hurt vaguely. She tossed and turned in her sleep, feeling more and more uncomfortable, but she still refused to wake up. I don't know how long it took, but someone seemed to be calling her name in a trance. The voice was so gentle that it almost made people sink. She murmured in a low voice, "Brother Pei." In the dream, it was Pei Xian's gentle and elegant face. That year, when she was still young, she worked too hard at dance practice and developed a high fever. However, the family doctor was away on vacation. At 2 o'clock in the morning, Pei Xian took her to the hospital. There were only two of them in the emergency room late at night. He took off his coat and wrapped it up. He looked at her and hummed awkwardly. At that time, Xiaoling thought that his singing was not good and that he treated her like a child. Xiaoling, who was 12 or 13 years old, frowned and asked him to stop singing. She looked at him seriously and said, "Brother Pei, I'm very old. Don't treat me like a child." At that time, her sister Xiaoyu, she always calls him Brother Xian sweetly, but she always calls him Brother Pei. Later she became his lover and only called him Zi Hung. She has never been able to do this kind of thing like coquettishly. So after that, I never heard him sing again. But now, she really wanted to grab Pei Xian's sleeve and say, "Sing me another song." Dimly, it seemed that something really sounded, intermittent, as clumsy and unpleasant as she remembered. But she gradually calmed down in such singing, her consciousness blurred, and she sank into sweet darkness. When she woke up, Xiaoling found herself in the carriage. The night is falling outside the car window, and the shadows of trees on both sides of the road are crisscrossing, brushing against the car body as they fly past. The car was very quiet, and the dim street lights dimly shone in, reflecting the handsome silhouette of the person holding her. Li Lei. At this time, he held her on his lap, his eyes slightly closed, and he didn't know if she fell asleep. His head was leaning on the back seat, and his crow-feather-like eyelashes cast a light shadow under his eyelids, which was a little less sharp than during the day and a little more gentle. This is a really good-looking person. Xiaoling moved her body slightly, and he noticed it immediately. He opened his eyes and saw her, and smiled, "Wake up so soon? How do you feel? Do you feel uncomfortable anywhere?" Her dark green eyes flickered, as if blurred stars in the night sky. She then realized that even though she was covered with a thick blanket and her forehead was covered with a hot towel, she still felt cold all over. He opened his mouth and struggled to make a sound, but his voice was so hoarse that even he could hardly recognize it. What's wrong? You have a fever, he replied in a brisk tone. I told you to take off your wet dress before, but you didn't listen. You still show off despite being caught in the rain. You deserve this, he said this. He kept moving his hands, lifting her head up a little, and brought a glass of water to her lips. Drink it. She took a few sips of water from his hand. It was actually warm. She didn't know where the warm water came from in the car. He seemed to see her doubts and said, you started to have a fever when you were taking shelter in the cave in the afternoon, and you were unconscious. I had to ask Lao Chen to contact the emergency team on the mountain. As soon as the rain stopped, I brought a full set of fever-reducing supplies. Will come to pick you up. Thank you, she said hoarsely. Thank you, I'm your boss. I heard from Tan Ying that you're just a trainee who hasn't debuted yet. If something happens to you, who will take the money invested by the company, he said with a smile. But she heard a dark clue, wondering, what was his intention to take such good care of her? Rich people are really assholes. End of this chapter.